Hello, good evening friends. My name is Nikita Bude and today we are going to discuss about the efficacy guidelines. Efficacy guideline is a document which gives the standard definition and the terminology for a key aspect and the clinical safety reporting. After that, the guidance on the mechanism of a handling expedited reporting of adverse drug reaction in the investigational phase of a drug development. The ICH has published the number of the documents setting standards for the safety both clinical and the preclinical trials. After that, the preclinical guidelines have the S designated designation. After that, the clinical safety guidelines add a designation as a E, standing for the efficacy. The investigational conference of hand harmonization of a technical requirements for the registration of a pharmaceutical for the human use for a human use. After that, the quality, safety, efficacy, and the multidisciplinary, these are the basic types of efficacy guidelines. That means in quality Q1 and Q1 to Q11, it is a chemical and pharmaceutical for the qualitative analysis. After that, the safety, that is S1 to S10, and the M3, that dealing with the in vivo and in vitro study in a preclinical testing. Efficacy E1 to E16 are the expect E13, that is the clinical studies in a human beings. Multidisciplinary M1 and M8 are the terminology electronic standards are common. After that, in that we studies the efficacy. The efficacy, the work carried out by the ICH under the efficacy healing, the concurrent with the design, conduct, safety and reporting of a clinical trials. It also conduct the novel types. After that, the medical medicines derived from a biotechnological process and the use of a pharmacogenetics, genomics, the technical products, the targeting the medicines, that is efficacy. After that, E1 and E2 is a clinical safety efficacy guideline. E3 is a clinical study report guideline. E4 is a dose response study. E5 is ethical factors. E6 is a food clinical practice. After that, the E7, E8, E9, E10, E11 are the clinical trials that guidelines used for the clinical trials. After E12 is a guideline for the clinical evaluation of a therapeutic category. After that, the E14 is a clinical evaluation. E15 and E16 is a pharmacogenomics. Then we see that all the guidelines one by one. E1 and E2 clinical safety, the extent of population exposure to access, the clinical safety for the drugs intended for long term treatment of life threatening conditions. This document gives the recommendation on the number of patients and duration of exposure for a number safety evaluation of a drug. After that, the E3 is a clinical safety report. This document describes the format and the content of a safety report that will be acceptable in all three ICH regions. It consists of core reports suitable for all the submission and the appendix. After that, the E4 is a dose response study. The document gives recommendations on the design and conduct the studies to assess the relationship between dose, levels, blood levels and the clinical response throughout the clinical development. After that, E5 is ethnic factors, that is purpose of this guideline is to facilitate and the designation the documents among the ICH region, that is a E5. After that, E6 is a good clinical practice. GCP. GCP has an investigational ethical specific quality standard for design to conducting the recording and reporting of trials involving the participating of a human subject. These are the guidelines of efficacy guidelines, that are in that very subtypes are also available, that is E1, that is E2A, that after that the E2A B3, after that the E2A B3 R3, after that E2A C R1, E2C R2, E2C R3, after that E2D, E2F, E2D, E2F R. These are the types, means the subtypes of guidelines. So efficacy guidelines is a document which the standard definition and the terminology for a key aspect for clinical safety reporting. After that, the give guidelines of mechanism for handling expedite reporting of adverse drug reaction in the investigational phase of drug development. After the ICH has published a number of documents setting standards for safety, both the clinical and preclinical trials. Preclinical guidelines have as S designated, that is example S1 or S2, that is the after that the clinical safety guidelines are designated as a E, standing for efficacy, means for preclinical trial is designated as S, and for the clinical trial is designated as E, that E stand for the efficacy. This is an overview of efficacy guidelines. That's efficacy guidelines. We again overview that all the topics we are discussed in that video. That is basic information about the efficacy guidelines, the definition, the types of guidelines, that is a quality, safety, efficacy, and multidisciplinary, that is a Q1 to Q11 as a quality, pharmaceutical, Q quality to analysis and a chemical. Safety is a S1 to S10, M3 dealing with the in vivo and in vitro studies in the clinical testing. And then after that the efficacy E1 to E16, that except the E13, the clinical studies in human beings. Efficacy after that the multiplicatory, and that is depend upon M1 to M8, that is the terminology, electronic standards and commerce. In that four types we study the efficacy. Now efficacy guidelines, now that is efficacy guidelines is carried out by the ICH under the efficacy healing concept with the designation conduct the safety reporting for the clinical trials, that is E1, E2, E3, E4 up to E16. That is E1 and E2 is a clinical safety. After that E3 is a clinical study report. After that E4 is a dose or response studies. E5 is a ethical factor. E6 is a good clinical practice. E7, 8, 9, 10, 11 are the clinical trials. E12 are the guideline for the clinical evaluation for the therapeutic strategy, and E14 chemical evaluation, clinical evaluation, E15 and E16 pharmacogenetics. This is an overview of efficacy guidelines. After that we study the subtypes, that E1, E2A, E2B R2, E2B R3, E2C R1, E2C R2, E2D, E2E, E2F. that are also the subtypes of guidelines that briefly we are studying in a next part of a video. That's it. Thank you so much.